Good evening from Vietnam. Good morning to you, Tamara. Thanks a lot for spending your beautiful morning joining our show and share your stories to our global audience. And on behalf of the listeners around the world, we're going to say thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here.
Tamara, thanks a lot for the works that you do to help leaders get better, to create a beautiful environment for the employees to go to work and have meaningful works, and that's very important for us. Like we talked earlier before the show starts, right? So if and happy employees go home and they can bring the conversation about works to the next generation at the dining table. Imagine the next people coming to workforce, the hope, the aspiration, everything is amazing. And thanks a lot for doing that, Tamara.
Thank you. This is exactly why I do what I do, why I do the research and why I work with leaders and why I teach future leaders these practices on how to make work meaningful, because I truly believe that our workplaces are our biggest levers to increase well-being at a global scale because of exactly what you said, right? We spend more time at work than in anything else in our lives. We spend more time at work than with our family, with our friends, or any hobbies or other communities that we are a part of. And our experience at work, we bring that home with us. And so that affects our family, it affects our community, right? There's research on network effects that we spread our behaviors and our emotions up to 3 degrees of separation. And so when work feels meaningful, when we feel like we belong at work, when we know how what we do matters, and when we feel like we're growing and learning and reaching our potential, that makes work feel really meaningful. It increases our well-being, our resilience. We bring that home with us. We show up better for our friends, for our spouses, for our kids. And that has such a ripple effect. And so I love that you started with that, because that is exactly what drives me to do what I do.
Beautiful. And we want to congratulate you and your co-author for the launching of your newest book, Meaningful Work, in April 1st. And this conversation, we're going to not only talk about that book, we're going to examine the journey leading you to writing that book and to help the people understand more about the story of Tamara. Okay?
Great.
All right. And since you haven't been to our countries, if you decided to travel to this part of the world, please let us know. We would love to welcome you when you come here.
Thank you. I would love to visit and meet you and experience the culture. I grew up in Brazil, so I'm from a different culture. I live here in the United States now. I've lived in both countries for half my life. So I really appreciate traveling and learning about cultures and meeting people and tasting the food. So yes, I look forward to the day when I can come visit.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we got a privilege to meet a lot of our guests on our beautiful country when they travel to this part of the world also. So one day you will have a chance to meet in person. Will come. I believe that.
Me too.
Okay. And Tamara, for a little taste about culture, it's very honored if we can have you to share a little bit about who you are and the work you are doing to our audience, please.
Yeah, so I'm a professor at Boston College. I teach in the Masters of Science in Leadership, and I'm a researcher and instructor out of the University of Pennsylvania, out of the Positive Psychology Center there. And then I also do speaking and training, helping leaders create these environments where people can experience more meaning at work. And the way I got here to do what I do was I started my career in advertising. And I did that for almost 10 years, right? And I loved it. I worked in environments where I was learning and growing. I had leaders who believed in me, and I was making an impact, with the clients that I work with and helping their brands get the recognition that they deserved. And I loved that work at the agency in New York, where I worked for many years. And then I had switched jobs, and I worked doing the same kind of work, for an advertising agency, but it was a completely different work environment. In that new agency, I didn't feel like I was learning and growing. I was completely bored. I kept asking for more work. I wanted opportunities to learn. I didn't really feel like I saw the impact of my contributions. I didn't know if my contributions mattered. So it was a completely different work environment. So same industry, same type of work, but totally different experience. And so I was really curious to understand, you know, what was different? Like, why did one light me up and energize me and make me so motivated to work? But why did the other experience totally drain me and make it really hard for me to be engaged and motivated? So I had that experience, but then I transitioned out of advertising and started consulting with organizations on productivity systems. So
Mm.
I really believed that, and I still believe that how we spend our time matters completely, right? Because it matters for the impact that we have. It matters for how we feel at the end of the day. And so I took my experiences in advertising advertising client services, right? Things move really fast and deadlines are really short. And so you have to meet them. And so I had a lot of personal experience in seeing systems that worked. And so I ended up developing a model that I called the peak productivity pyramid. And my first book was called The Secret to Peak Productivity. That book was published in 2014, and I was working with leaders and organizations and speaking and teaching people these systems to help us be more productive. And what I was noticing is that when people had systems in place and became more productive, they had more time to spend on meaningful work, on things that really mattered and energized them. But also, when people were spending more time on work that felt meaningful, they were more productive. So I started noticing this virtuous cycle in place. And I was really curious to understand how does this work? What's the science behind it? And how can we intentionally create this cycle? And so I went back to school at University of Pennsylvania to study positive psychology under the founder of the field, Marty Seligman. And that's where I met my co-author. On the first day of graduate school, I met Les. And we clicked, and we were both there to study meaningful work. And so we partnered up, and we've been doing this research together for, since that first day. And that
Wow.
research has become the book that's about to be published.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful. And you introduced about your journey in only 3 minutes of the time. Tamara, is not fair for our audience. And I noted in here a lot of key words for these conversations, and from curiosity, from being in one environment to the next environment. That took the curiosity for you to understand, to find out why, in the same industry and two different, environment, and that leading to your first book on productivity, and then leading to the next journey that is very beautiful. All right, but we want to know more. All right, so Tamara, this conversation is designed to know more about the journey that you've been having, the love for what you do, and so let's travel time together. How does that sound to you?
That sounds great.
All right. So when I was little, I wanted to become an astronaut. So I live in a very poor community, and we have light one day, and then we don't have electricity for the next 2 or 3 days, and that's normal. So I always love the moon because it shines on that when it comes at night, right? Especially when there's no electricity in the neighborhood. So I always wanted to become an astronaut. But life didn't give me any opportunity to do anything close to what I wanted to do, except I've been able to interview General Charlie Duke, who is the youngest man out of the 12 people ever walk on the moon on Apollo mission number 16. And so for you, when you were little, what was your dream about the future works that Tamara is going to do and to bring to the world?
So I grew up in Brazil. I lived there. My whole family is in Brazil, and I lived there until my early 20s when I transferred to a university in the United States. So growing up in Brazil, was just a really special and beautiful childhood that I have, because my whole family kind of lived in the same city. So I grew up surrounded by community. In Brazil, it's really important. Family is really important. People are super connected. When my husband, my now husband, right, when we started dating and he came down to Brazil with me for the first time, one of the things that really struck him was how no one asked him, "What do you do?" Right? Because in Brazil, people ask you, "Oh, like, who's your family? Like, what's your last name?" And so people relate to each other not so much based on what you do, but like, where do you come from? Who's your family? How do you, who do I know that you know? So it's very relational. And so that's kind of set the foundation, I think, for me, and what's important to me. And relationships are so front and center to me. So when I was growing up in Brazil, I was always very creative. And so I loved theater and singing and performing and writing and poetry and all of that. So I, early on as a little girl, wanted to be a singer, actually. And that was my dream. But I also wanted to be a writer. I read a lot and I wrote a lot. And I thought maybe poetry would be what I would write, or maybe even writing music. So in a way, the singing dream, sometimes I do karaoke, but the writing dream became true.
Wow. Tamara, I interview over 1,100 people in 80 countries, and only a very small portion of the guests on the show being able to map from the dream when they were young onto what they've been doing now. And that also very, very resilience of you to, because throughout the life, there's so many things that happen that could, take you away from that little interest when you were little, right? And so tell us, how could you keep that dream of writing, that love of writing for this long in the world of so many changes happened during, the last couple of, the many, many years of your life?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question, because even though I always wrote and I journaled and I wrote poetry, then when the time came and I had to go to college and all of that, I actually didn't think I could become a writer. I didn't think I could pursue like a creative, career, because it's hard and there's a lot of risk involved. And my family was very conservative. And so I ended up pursuing advertising, because I thought, here's a place where I can use my creativity and be in business. So it's like a real job, right? And so I went to school to study advertising, and I loved it because it was a way that I could still be creative. Although I didn't go into copywriting and advertising, I went into client services. So I was an account manager and I did client relationships, which again, relationships are really important to me, and I was good at that. And then I feel like becoming a writer was almost accidental in a way, because when I became a consultant and I was working with leaders in creating systems around productivity, I was reading everything I could on existing productivity systems, and some are amazing, like Getting Things Done, David Allen and Harold Taylor, and I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I learned so much. But what I was learning when I was putting those systems into practice with leaders is that, it just wasn't quite working, because a lot of the systems that existed before mine were based on, you had to start with your values and your big goals, like your long-term goals, and then kind of funnel down to your everyday tactics. But what I was finding is that the people that I was working with were so busy. They were just trying to, keep their head above water. And so to take the time to thoughtfully engage with their values and their big goals was hard and almost impossible. And so my pyramid kind of flips most productivity systems around and actually starts with, let's organize your space. When we have organized workspaces, when we create what I call a power office where things are accessible, you know where to find things electronically, physically, it clears your mind. So let's clear the clutter. to clear your mind. Now you'll have more focus. So then let's then start putting some time management systems and practices in place, because now we're kind of clearing out and organizing your calendar and being really intentional about how you spend your time. Then after that, we go into values and goals and making sure. So we kind of flipped, the productivity world in its head a little bit, what I was doing. And then people started to ask me to share it. So I started just like taking notes and writing things down and putting together PowerPoints, and I was speaking, and I had like 80 pages of messy notes. It was kind of a mess, and bullet points. At that point, I had 3 kids under 5. Like I was running my business. I was also building my family at the same time. So I was like, oh, maybe one day I will write a book. And then at a Starbucks one day, when I was with my kids there, they were going to karate. I stopped at Starbucks to get them hot chocolate as a treat, because I had told them, if you do X, Y, and Z, I don't even remember what, we'll stop at Starbucks on our way to karate and we'll get hot chocolate. So when I was there was this gentleman sitting there kind of focused and writing or typing. And my kids, like a 4, a 3, and a 2-year-old, they were being pretty loud. And I was like, oh my gosh. And he commented like, oh, your kids are so cute. And we started talking. He told me he was a writer. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. My kids are disrupting you. He's like, no, not at all. And so we started talking about writing and all of that. And it really sparked in me that desire to then write. He was like, oh, well, there are people who can help you. Like you don't have to do it alone, because I didn't know how to write a book. I had never written a book. And so I ended up hiring a writing coach who kind of held my hand through the whole process. And that's how I kind of became a writer. It was like very serendipitous in that moment that pathway opened for me, because I couldn't even imagine writing a book, right? While I was like just trying to run a business and manage and grow my family.
Wow, Tamara, I believe in the law of attractions. So when I interview Dr. Edith Eger, so she's the Holocaust survivor. She wrote many beautiful books, and one of that book is The Choice. And that acknowledged
I love that book.
Yeah,
I love that book.
She wrote this. I don't believe that people come to my life; they are sent to my life. So they are angels sent to your life for you to experiment the works, the up and down, the pain gains, and for you to write, to put the writing onto actions. Okay, so that gentleman there was the one who sent you to your life, so that now it's taking you to a different path. I want to bring you to the moment that you had the seed of that idea for the productivity pyramid that you said is the reverse directions, right? And you've been preparing for a long time, learning about productivity, reading about productivity, and a lot of us also reading about some topics, but coming up an idea, having a model out of that, and be able to share those model, that your model to other people so that they can apply to their life seems to be out of reach for many people. Okay, me included. So Tamara, help us. How did you be able to work on the topic of productivity and be able to simplify in the way that you can help people to understand productivity in a reverse way and make it works for them?
I think that is one of my strengths. When I take, there's an assessment that is a positive psychology, evidence-based assessment called the VIA survey of character strengths. Values in action is what VIA stands for, and it's free and it's available in hundreds of languages. So if you want to take it, it's viacharacter.org, VIA character.org. And I didn't know this at the time, right? But now I do, because I work and teach positive psychology. But when I took the assessment, so when you take the assessment, the top 5 to 7 results on your list are what's called your signature strengths. And signature strengths are part of who you are at your core. They come to you easily. They are energizing when you use it. And three of my top five are curiosity, creativity, and love of learning. And so I think that those three strengths combine in me to make me kind of good at consuming a lot of information and then kind of simplifying it and creating frameworks, right? Because that's kind of what I did with the peak productivity pyramid. That's what I do in teaching. That's what we did with the new book that's coming out, Meaningful Work. We have a framework there of the 3 C's. And so it's taking a lot of information, learning a lot, putting it into practice, trying new things, and then kind of distilling it in a way that that makes sense. And so I think, I'm really fortunate that those are my strengths and that allows me to do that. But I also think that it's really great to honor whatever your strengths are, and then there's also a skill to that you can learn a lot, read a lot, try to be thoughtful, ask questions about, what's the most important information here? How would I explain it to a 5-year-old? How would I, and I had to do that, right? Because with 3 kids, as I was writing the book and growing my business, and I would have to explain it to a 5-year-old, to a 7-year-old, to a 9-year-old. So I got practice in doing that and explaining things and teaching it to others. And so I think all those factors kind of converged to help me design these frameworks and come up with the ideas that can resonate and be taught to others.
Beautiful. I don't remember who said this, but if you can put an idea and then explain it in the easy way that a young kid can understand, then that's called brilliant, right? So you say that you have to convert the idea to ask the question that can help you to convert the idea so that the kid at 5 years old can understand about this. So productivity is not something that kid at 5 years old would be able to understand, right? So bring it back to that moment, because we want to know what kind of questions that you ask yourself, and then what kind of thinking happened in your head that leading you to be able to simplify that idea and make it in a way that works instead of going with the traditional way you mentioned earlier, where it's a passion, the vision, and then down to time management, but in the total reversion.
I think one of the main questions that I asked myself was, why does productivity matter? Like, how do I define productivity? The way I grew up, it was never about, I grew up in Brazil, like I said, and relationships really matter. People work hard, but they don't work 24/7. They don't kind of sacrifice family and community at the altar of productivity, right? And so I had that experience growing up, and then I'm living here in the US and I'm working really hard, client services, advertising. I was working late every night, early every morning, and I did love it with my first agency. But so part of the question that I was asking myself was, why does productivity matter? How do I even define productivity? What does productivity mean to me? And what do I want to teach to the world? Like, what do I want to put out in the world? What am I advocating for here? And so what I decided and what I believe deeply is that productivity is not about doing more in less time. I think that is toxic productivity, and it's a story that we tell ourselves, and it can be really detrimental to our mental health and well-being when we tell ourselves the story that productivity is about doing more in less time. What I believe and how I talk about productivity is that productivity is doing more of what matters in the time that we have. And so it's a minor shift, right, in the definition, but I think that doing what matters most first is so important, because first of all, we have to understand what matters most. We have to define those priorities, right? And then in the time that we have also kind of helps us understand that, time is the common denominator of the human experience. right? We
Yes.
all have 24 hours a day, no matter how old we are, how young we are, what color our skin is, how much money we have or don't have in our bank accounts. Like, we all have the same amount of time. And so, how do we choose to spend that time? And for me, it was so important to balance, right? And I know balance is a word that people either like or hate. But for me, it was important to balance, the time that I was dedicating to work and to growing my business with the time that I wanted to spend with my kids and my family and, involved in my community. And so by thinking about productivity as doing what matters most first, it always gives you the choice of choosing what matters most first today. And today it might be that my kid is sick, and what matters most is for me to spend time with them, to take them to the doctor, to, whatever it is that I need to do. But there are other days that what matters most is that I'm writing the book and sharing my ideas. So it's a daily choice that we get to make when we view productivity through that lens.
Beautiful. And during the journey of introducing that, the book, the productivity pyramid model, and you mentioned earlier that you started to see the linkage between, when we have the meaning at works, then our productivity even increasing and stuff like that. So since when that idea came to your mind?
So my pyramid is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a very well-known theory of motivation. And he says that, people aren't motivated to reach higher level needs until some more basic needs are met. And so, for example, until we have safety, physical safety, we have access to food and shelter, we are not motivated to, or we are less motivated to search for status and belonging. Like, we have to take care of basic needs before higher level needs and higher order needs are met. And so often his hierarchy of needs is represented in a pyramid, even though he never drew the pyramid, it was a consultant. But very often when you Google like Maslow hierarchy of needs, you'll see a pyramid. So I modeled my pyramid based on Maslow. And so my pyramid has 5 levels, and it's at the very bottom, it's physical organization, then electronic organization, and those are the foundation of the pyramid. It's what I call the survival needs, right? Like, for you to survive at work, you have to have like those basic systems in place. And then the next 2 are time management, and then activity goal alignment. And those are what I call the success. So the bottom 2 are survive, those 2 are success. And at the top of my pyramid, where Maslow has the reaching your full potential or self-actualization, in my pyramid is this level that I call possibility. Right. And that level is where thriving lives. So it's survive, succeed, thrive. And thrive is in that possibility level. And when I wrote the book, I was basing it on years of experience, seeing leaders with those other 4 levels in place, kind of being open now to this world of possibilities. Like, what do I do with this extra time I have? People who implement the practices in my book would find themselves with an average of 2 additional hours per week, right? But what we do with those 2 hours really matters. We don't want to fritter it away. We don't want to doom scroll and spend it, kind of binge watching stuff. And so how do we become intentional about that? And that's where kind of meaningful work was living in the experience that I was seeing with the leaders I was working with. They were spending time doing meaningful activities, doing meaningful work. And then they were so energized that they became even more productive, because they were better at selecting the things that mattered most about, like, where do they want to spend their time, their energy, their focus. And so that's when I was like, wait, there's something happening here in this possibility level. I'm not really sure what it is. I'm super curious. At that point, I was learning about the field of positive psychology. I had done a year-long course and a certificate in applied positive psychology. I was seeing a lot of parallels between productivity, meaningful work, thriving, right? Positive psychology. I wanted to put it all together. I wanted to create some kind of system, but I didn't know how. I didn't have all the information yet. And so that's when I applied for graduate school. I really wanted to study the relationship between productivity, meaningful work, thriving, well-being, business outcomes, all of that.
Wow. I note in here the word intentional, because the moment that you realize something, then you put all the efforts in having the full intention to make sure that your curiosity will lead the way, your creativity will lead the way, and the love of learning inside of you will lead the way for you, because that's the first three from your strength, right? To lead the way for you to fully understand and do something with that. So I will ask a side questions regarding to this. Was there anybody in your life, or are there anybody in your life that been a source of influence in you to be very intentional, whatever you do, and set the goal to do?
So many people. I think my parents, for sure. One of the things my mom always said to me, that always I hear that in the back of my head, no matter what I'm doing, is, and she still says it, is, everything that deserves to be done deserves to be well done. Like, that's something I hear in my brain all the time. And so it's this idea, like, what deserves to be done? How can I be intentional about here? I don't want to go through my day just doing things mindlessly. So first of all, that part of, like, everything that deserves to be done. So where am I putting my time and energy? What deserves to be done? And then the second part deserves to be well done. Do it with excellence, do it with care, do it with intention and focus. So I think that, my mom's influence, like, truly, truly shaped how I kind of see the world. And I think with my dad, my dad was always learning, reading books and books on his nightstand and working hard. Like, he really taught me the value of hard work, of pursuing your dreams. And, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. My mom is a dentist. She has been running her own practice for over 40 years, and I grew up, and my dad was also a professor and also owned and ran his own business. So not only did I learn, and it's interesting because I have two siblings, an older sister and a younger brother, and all of us are entrepreneurs. And so we grew up in a family of entrepreneurs, and we all became entrepreneurs. And I think part of what drove me to become an entrepreneur was the value of time. Right. Because I think, with seeing my parents being able to be really intentional about how they were spending their time. Of course, when you're an entrepreneur, you can work 24/7, and you're typically working 24/7, but they were so intentional about, kind of putting boundaries around that, delegating effectively, developing people, and then spending time, quality time with us, with the kids. And so I think seeing that in action was really inspiring for me in my journey, and continues to be. And then another big source of support and inspiration is my husband, right? I think he exemplifies the leadership strategies that I have studied, that I teach leaders. I think he does that so well and so naturally in his leadership roles and his organizations and in his beliefs and how he operates in the world. So I learn a lot from him and just observing him, but also to have his support in, helping me kind of start the business and think of ideas. Sometimes it can be so lonely as an entrepreneur when you're starting and you're kind of like talking to yourself, and brainstorming with yourself. And so having him as a thought partner has been really amazing. And then I think my three kids are such a source of inspiration when I think about, like, why do I care? Why do I do this? Like, why do I work so hard? Why do I do all these things? It's because of them, because I want them to enter a world of work that is full of meaning, that has leaders who care, that, that are creating environments where people can flourish. And so I think inspiration can come from so many places.
Wow. So let's connect that those are the mini culture, the small circle of people. We call that mini organizations that, within that organization where, things well put and the environment is well designed so that, help you to flourish, right? So if organization can create similar kind of culture like that, imagine, how meaningful we can create for the works, for the employees that leaders are leading, right? So Tamara, tell us now about the book. You know, how did you and Wes started to form that idea and starting to research and write the book? Share with us, please.
Yes. So Wes and I met on the very first day of graduate school. We kind of, when class ended, a group of us were kind of walking back to the hotel where we were staying, and Wes and I kind of fell in lockstep next to each other, and we started chatting. We went to dinner. We ended up sitting next to each other, and we hit it off. We were, he has a different background from mine. He kind of worked a lot in hospitality, and creating these like meaningful experiences for customers. And then he went into the social impact world, and he was working in nonprofits and really mission driven organizations. And for him, he was thinking, oh, this is going to feel really meaningful, right? Because I'm working at a mission driven organization. But that wasn't his experience. Sometimes even having this mission and this purpose wasn't enough to make work meaningful. And so he came to school to understand, like, why isn't, like, I thought this was going to be meaningful, but it's not. Why? What are the levers? How do you create great teams? How do you create meaning at work? And so we had come very curious about the same thing, but from very different angles. And so we started sharing research articles and kind of connecting about meaningful work. And he was like, I think we should do our research together. And I was like, no, thanks, but no thanks. I was like, I kind of want to do my own thing. I want to study this. I want to just write my next book. And he's like, okay. So then and he's like, we're kind of doing the same thing. Like, I think we should do this together. And his persistence paid off after a couple months. I was like, you're right. And so we joined forces and we started this research together. And what was really interesting when we were learning about meaningful work at school was that all of the research that we were reading and learning about was about creating meaning at work from the individual perspective. So here I am, working at an organization. How can I find more meaning in my own work? And there's amazing research on this, like job crafting research. There's things individuals can do to increase their sense of meaning in their own work. But we were curious about the leadership role, and we weren't really finding a lot of information in research done on the leader's impact. And so that's what we set out to find. We wanted to understand, do leaders have a role in creating meaning at work or in the meaningful work experience of the individual? If yes, then how big is that role? And also, are there intentional practices and things that leaders can do to then increase the sense of meaning at work? So these were the questions that we started with. And we started, the first phase of our research was a qualitative study. So we found organizations, and in order to participate in our study, we had several criteria. We were looking for senior leaders, so senior VP or above, in organizations that had been around for at least 5 years, that were successful financially, and that were intentional about creating meaningful work environments, right? And that had been recognized for a strong culture, high employee engagement. So we had a lot of criteria that leaders and organizations had to fit before they were kind of approved to participate in our study. So we were studying exemplars, positive outliers, people who were doing this really well. Because when we study people that are doing it really well, we can learn what they're doing and then apply it to, to create possibilities for others that aren't doing that yet. And so that was so inspirational. So we were doing qualitative interviews. So we were interviewing these leaders and hearing their stories and hearing what they're doing. And that was so inspiring. So that was phase one of the research, and that we published that in August of 2020. And then from there, we did several rounds of quantitative study. We wanted to understand if these practices that emerged in our study are great, but do they actually make work meaningful? We need to ask now employees that are led by these leaders, not just the leaders, because they might be doing that, but we don't know if it's actually having an impact. So we did research for the next 3 years, trying to understand all the impact and all of that. And that paper, the academic peer-reviewed paper, was published in 2023. And a couple of highlights of the things we found, right? So I told you we were wondering back in graduate school, do leaders have an impact? And what we found actually really surprised us, because yes, leaders have an impact, and the impact is much higher than we expected. Leaders are responsible for 48% of our experience of meaning at work. So almost half of our experience is directly related to what our leaders and managers do and don't do. And so no matter how much I, as an individual, try to create meaning at work for myself in job craft, there's only so far I can go. I can only get there halfway. The leaders have to meet me halfway. And so that was an exciting finding, because although it is a huge responsibility, it's also a huge opportunity, right? And so that was a big finding. And then the other finding was, that's really exciting, and what the book is about is the specific practices, the specific things that leaders can do to then increase that sense of meaning at work.
Beautiful, beautiful. So besides leaders, who else should be the target audience for the book that you and Wes are writing?
So the way we define leadership is really broad, because it doesn't just mean that you're C-level, although if you are C-level, that's a huge responsibility, because people are really looking at you for cues on how to behave. But the way we define leadership is influence. And so, we all have influence on each other's experiences at work. And so you don't have to necessarily be in charge of people, be a manager or a leader, in order for these practices to work. So the book is written in a way that's accessible to everyone. And so if you are an entry-level employee at an organization, but you really care about meaningful work, this is a great book, because you're going to have an impact on the people you work with directly. And as you emerge as a leader, you're already going to be putting the practices in place, and shaping your experience as a leader to be a meaning-driven leader.
Wow. Tamara, I know the next question is not going to be fair for you, but if we ask you to pick a chapter in your book and to share with us, so what is the chapter and why you picked that chapter?
That is hard. It's like picking a favorite child. You can't do that, because you
Oh,
love
I'm
all
sorry.
of them the same. All right. So before I zoom into a chapter, I want to just talk about the framework that we created in the book, right? So we have all this academic research, we have the paper that was published, and it's all these practices. But, the truth is, people are busy, leaders are busy, and nobody is really taking the time to read academic research and translate it into practices. And so Wes and I did that. We took the academic research and we translated it into a framework that's really accessible for leaders. And it's what we call the 3 C's of meaningful work. And the 3 C's are community, contribution, and challenge. And these are the ingredients for meaningful work from what we found in our research. So community is about understanding that you matter, like feeling that you matter to the organization as an individual. And so it's about feeling that you belong and that you can show up authentically and that people care about you. So that's community. Contribution is feeling that what you do matters. Like, I spend my whole day working on spreadsheets and responding to emails. How does this matter to the organization? So understanding the impact that what we do has to others, and it can be to our team, it can be to our customer, right? So anything outside the self. How does what I do make a difference every day? And then challenge is about feeling like your growth and development matters to the organization and the leaders in the organization. So challenge is about having opportunities to reach your full potential. It's having, leaders who believe in you, who see your strengths, and who give you kind of a push into growing and learning, and are challenging you to do the hard thing because they believe in you. And so these are the 3 C's: community, contribution, and challenge. Now, to zoom into a chapter. So hard. All right. I think I am going to zoom into chapter 4, which is called Cultivate Connection, right? Which is part of community. And the chapter opens with one of our favorite stories in the book, and I'll just kind of condense it a little bit. So imagine you are walking through a forest, right? Maybe you're taking your dogs for a hike and you're in the middle of the woods, and you see a bunch of trees, right? And you're seeing like aspen trees and birch trees and oak trees and all these different trees. And you can think that these trees are just individual kind of trees that are just there, working alone and just kind of doing their thing alone as individuals. But what's actually happening is that underneath the ground, these trees are interconnected by a system of roots and fungi that connect them. And through that network of connection, they are passing distress signals and resources to each other, and they're communicating and helping each other thrive. And so trees, a forest is not a collection of individual trees, but science calls it a superorganism. A forest is a superorganism. And what we found is that organizations where leaders create community are what we call super organizations. These teams, they're not just made up of, single talented individuals, but these individuals are interconnected by this underground network, not underground, but this invisible network of support, of collaboration, of trust, of shared experiences. And that's really intentionally cultivated in these super organizations, because when we care about each other, when we have strong relationships with each other, we collaborate much more effectively. We are able to help. We are able to, the trees send distress signals. We can communicate more effectively. We can help each other out. And so I love that chapter. I love that overlay of superorganisms and super organizations. And one of the questions in our research that we asked that really predicted this strong sense of relationships at work and this feeling of community was, does your leader know what's happening in your life outside of work? Right? And people who answered yes had a much stronger sense of community at work than the people who answered no. And so as a leader, as a team member, do you know what your team member, what your colleague, what they did this weekend? Do you know what their hobbies are? What's the last book they loved? What's their favorite quote? What are their kids' names? Like, these are pretty basic things, but they really matter.
Wow. Tamara, for the years working as the creative agencies and helping companies to be brand, you make this introduction about your book so curious for me, and I'm sure for a lot of leaders, a lot of audience who listen to this conversation, because we believe that works that you and Wes put out truly will help to transform the way that we lead organization and help building the meaningful work for the people. And we want to pick one thing, because that also asks leaders to really change the way they do, right? So if there's a one little baby step that they need to change now before the book is launching, so that from now into April 1st they have 20 days for them to make the change, to get ready for it, what would be that change, Tamara?
I think the most impactful small thing leaders can do right now, they can start today, they can start right now, the minute they're done listening to this episode, is to go thank someone, go recognize their contributions, right? It is one of the most underutilized tools we have. And research shows that a simple thank you from a manager once a week is enough to reduce burnout and disengagement, cut them in half. And that 40% of people, only 40% of people, so only 4 in 10 people feel like they are recognized appropriately or they're thanked often enough for the work that they do. And so if there's one thing you can do right now is pause and think about what specific contribution did that person have, and go tell them. And sometimes people, sometimes leaders don't do that because either they assume the person knows, or because there's like a little bit of awkwardness involved in expressing gratitude. But research also shows that, people never regret expressing gratitude, and that this behavior can be contagious. And so not only are you thanking and recognizing someone, it's going to make them feel great. But what usually happens is that they then start noticing and recognizing and thanking people for their contributions. And so it creates kind of a positive upward spiral that can be so, so meaningful.
Beautiful, beautiful. Tamara, two last question for this wonderful conversation, okay? And you mentioned one word repeatedly in this conversation is the word think. And my wife and I, we want to help people to improve their ability to think, because we believe that our thinking capability has been diminishing for so many reasons. And you are a wonderful thinker. You met so many amazing people throughout your works. So the question for you, Tamara, is how have you been growing your ability to think over the years?
One of the biggest things that I learned over the years is that we have this bias called the confirmation bias. And that is our bias to kind of confirm what we already believe and dismiss what we already don't believe, right? And so we tend to only look for and believe information that supports our existing beliefs. And it's really hard, right, to overcome natural biases. There's reasons why we have these biases, and they evolved over millennia. But one of the things that I try really hard to do is to question my thinking, when I can. And so one of the questions that I ask myself a lot is, what else is true? What else is true? And I think that helps me sometimes. It helps broaden my perspective and bring a little bit more critical thinking to the things that I'm working on, to the practices, to my beliefs. And I'm not perfect at this. I exhibit a lot of confirmation bias, but it's something that I try to do.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, last question is traveling time together one more time, okay? So you mentioned about your mother, and that I've noted in here that she said that anything deserves to be done well, okay? So I want to bring you to the moment that she first talked to you about that one. I bet that you were very, very young back then, and that is very hard, very big statement that she said to you at the young age. So it comes with confusion, it comes with a lot of different things, right? So if you can tell her about your life and the meaning of that one, how you apply it into your life in the future, so you tell that little Tamara about that, what would you tell her?
I actually remember the exact moment. Maybe it wasn't the first time, but the time that marked me the most. So in Brazil, we have this little treat called brigadeiro. And if anybody here has ever been to Brazil or gone to a Brazilian restaurant or bakery, they will definitely have seen brigadeiro. They are these little round chocolate fudgy treats that anytime you host a birthday party or somebody comes over to your house, it's like the go-to treat. And I think I was like maybe 5 years old. And we were getting ready for a birthday party, and we were sitting around the kitchen. My mom had made this big batch of brigadeiro, and it had cooled, and we had to roll them into these perfect little spheres that then you kind of put them in sugar, after you roll them. And my mom was like, okay, we got to make them all the same size, and it was me and my sister was there, a couple of my aunts, my mom. We were making hundreds of brigadeiros for the birthday party. And my mom was like, Tamara, you need to make them all the same size. Tamara, the same size. And I was just like rolling them away. And one was giant, one was little. They were all different sizes. And my mom just let me make a bunch of them. And when they were all done, she mushed them all back together. She like destroyed all my work. And she's like, everything that deserves to be done deserves to be well done. I was telling you to make them all the same size. You're going to start over. We want them all the same size. And that, really stayed with me because I was not listening. I was mailing it in. I just wanted to get it done. And that taught me a powerful lesson. That's not just about checking things off your to-do list. It's about having pride in the work that you do. It's about, kind of striving for excellence in what you do. And so I there's moments in your life that really stay with you. And that was one moment. And I think, I know because she tells me, I know my mom is really proud of me. She's actually coming to the US and she's coming to my book launch and she is so supportive of my work.
Wow. Tamara, so the next time that you have a chance to talk to her, you tell her that we love her also from Asia, okay? And her advice is so powerful and it's really eye-opening for a lot of people to relook at the way that they see things, they work, and they live it in their lives, okay? So Tamara, congratulations on the work, on the books, and I know that the next couple of weeks are going to be extremely busy for you, and I wish you all the best with the launching, and hope one day we're going to be able to see you in person. That would be wonderful. Okay.
Thank you. I hope so too. And this was such a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tamara. You have a wonderful day, and say hello to your family for us, please.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.